Hey guys, tonight we're tracing forgotten twists, frays, and fibers of Polynesian canoe knots. You're standing barefoot on coarse sand, the scent of salt and sun-warmed palm leaves drifting through the air. Before you lies a large, uneven heap of coconut husk, splitwood, and sun-bleached rope. Somewhere in that tangle is the skeleton of a seafaring marvel. If that is, you know where to begin, and you apparently do not. This is how voyaging starts. Not with grand departure, but with the quiet, meditative chaos of sorting cordage, and wondering if your great-uncle's knot chant was about a clove hitch or a coconut cake. Either way, you probably won't survive this if you're lashing snap mid-journey. So, let's take it slow. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where everyone's listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand at the edge of the canoe's frame, squinting. It's little more than a shallow, narrow hull at this point. Planks stitched together with cord, wide enough for one brave soul and a week's worth of smoked taro. The sail is nowhere in sight. But resting atop the canoe's ribs is a coiled bundle of sinnet, a rough, fibrous line spun from dried coconut husk. It feels scratchy in your palm, like the ghost of a beard or a frayed welcome mat. This is where the voyage begins, not with waves or starlight navigation, but with spinning thread. To build a sail, you first build rope, and before that, you spend hours stripping the husks from coconuts, soaking them, beating them into fibrous pulp, drying them, and then twisting, braiding, and sometimes singing over them. Because knots in this world are not just technical tools. They are chants, rhythms, inheritances. Historians still argue whether early Polynesians had a formal written system for knots, maybe symbolic notches, maybe something like tattoo patterns passed hand to hand. But what we do know is this. They made it work across thousands of miles of ocean, with no metal, no screws, no nails, and definitely no zip ties. The sail you're about to rig will be made of woven pandanus or matting, stretched across two wooden booms like the wings of a very sleepy dragonfly. And to get that sail flying, you need to start from the ground up, cord by cord. Take a deep breath. The air smells like crushed leaves and sun-baked wood. You kneel next to the long spar that will support the crab claw sail. You run your hand along its length, feeling tiny notches carved into the wood. Each notch is a memory, a marker, a reference to where knots should live. The first knot is a humble one. A simple loop pulled snug, not too tight. You twist the sunnet around a notch and loop it back under itself, murmuring the chant your teacher repeated 100 times. Not because the knot is complicated, but because it matters. A bad knot isn't just sloppy. It's a betrayal of tradition, and more importantly of physics. You work slowly, deliberately, the rhythm of the knot echoing like a lullaby. Over, under, pull, breathe. Again, over, under, pull, breathe. This is a modern sailing where you yank on neon paracord with cleats and pulleys. This is pure, slow time. A curious little detail. Some of these knots are designed to swell and tighten when wet, using the sea itself as a form of quality control. Lash it wrong and the cord frays. Lash it right and salt water sings it shut. You glance at the sunnet. It looks a little like hair, tangled, course, alive. Some say it is alive in a way. The canoe isn't just a vehicle. It's a body. And the cords? They're its ligaments, its nerves, its breath. Polynesian navigators saw their canoes as family, living, breathing companions. They talked to them, named them, and when they finally wore out or wrecked, they wept as if losing a sibling. That emotional bond extended to the knots themselves. Every lashing you tie becomes a conversation with the vessel. You finish the first row of lashings, then stop to rest your hands. Your fingertips are already raw. The coconut cord is unforgiving. One wrong tug, and you get a splinter from a tree that hasn't forgiven anyone since 1200 BCE. There's something meditative about it, though. The repetitive motion, the sun warming your back, the distant call of seabirds circling overhead. It lulls you into a trance. Time stretches, and you can almost forget that you're preparing for an ocean that would happily eat you if given a chance. But the knots? The knots don't care. They just hold. Silently, faithfully. You glance across the sand at the other canoes being prepared. Each one has its own personality. Some small and nimble, others grand and heavy with ceremonial carvings. But they all start the same way, with hands, with fiber, with knots. There's a quiet kind of pride in getting it right, in knowing the lash you just made will survive a tropical squall. Or won't, in which case someone will be muttering your name while bailing out seawater with a coconut shell at 2 a.m. You move to the next beam. Another lash, another chant, another breath. The work is slow. The knots aren't pretty, not yet, but they're getting there. And with each loop, you feel closer to the 1,000 nameless hands that tied these same knots long before you. The sail still waits, folded in the shade. But for now, it's enough to sit with the cord, twist and pull and tie and think. Not every voyage begins with a splash. Sometimes it begins with a knot. You wipe the sweat from your brow with a frond that does almost nothing, then return your gaze to the slowly growing pile of cord before you can get to lashing anything important. Outriggers, sails, your own sense of dignity. You have to finish making the sonnet. Because if there's one thing Polynesian canoe building teaches you, it's this. Before the knot comes a cord, and before the cord comes about 6 days of tedious labor involving coconut husks and your aching hands. You sigh and pick up another brownish clump. This one is particularly stubborn. Half fiber, half attitude. You start teasing it apart, your thumbs grinding the dry strands over flat stone, feeling the familiar scratch of the fibers pulling free. Sonnet cords are not one size fits all. The thickness varies depending on their use. Thin ones for sail ties, thicker ones for structural lashings, and sometimes decorative ones braided in intricate patterns that make you think, someone had waited too much time during cyclone season. To get here, you first had to collect coconuts. Not the fresh, green drinking kind, but the brown, hairy, slightly menacing ones. You let them sit until they're just dry enough to husk. Then comes a dehusking, where you stab each coconut onto a metal spike or a sharpened stick stuck in ground, depending on whether your ancestors invented blacksmithing yet, and peel off the husk in thick chunks. Each husk gets soaked in salt water for days, then pounded into loose fibers with rocks or wooden clubs. After drying in the sun, the real fun begins. Braiding. Twist 2 strands one way, then cross them the other way, again and again. The result is a cord that's strong, seawater resistant, and durable enough to hold an entire canoe together across thousands of miles of open ocean. It also gives you rope burns that last longer than some modern relationships. Historians still argue whether all sonnet was made from coconut, or if other fibers, like hibiscus bark or pandanus leaf, were sometimes mixed in. Some islands had different methods, possibly based on climate, availability, or sheer stubbornness. You run your fingers along a finished coil. It's rough but tight, like the rest of the canoe. The sonnet cord doesn't pretend to be comfortable. It's strong, functional. It was made with intention. And no two cords are exactly the same. On some islands, elders taught young canoe builders not just how to braid sonnet, but how to do it rhythmically. Braiding became a communal task, set to chants or drum beats. You can almost hear it now. The thud of wooden beaters on stone, the murmur of voices counting patterns, a child being scolded for tying their little brother to a palm tree instead of learning the 3-strand twist. A quirky fact, some communities gave cords their own names like pets. Each one was tagged according to its purpose or its source, the stern line, the sacred lash, or don't untie this or you'll curse the canoe. And speaking of curses, the belief in cord spirit or mana was strong. Cutting a cord carelessly or tying it while angry was thought to invite misfortune at sea. The canoe was a spiritual being, after all, and sonnet was its breath, its bones, its silent prayers. You inspect a growing pile. Each cord now looks like a strand of dark hair, laid out in loops across your knees. Neat but imperfect. You'll need yards of this stuff, hundreds of yards, in fact, to bind everything from outriggers to rudders to the sail itself. You shift your weight, stretching your back. The sun is high now, your arms speckled with coconut dust and tiny splinters. You glance at a nearby tree, where a bundle of older cords hang drying from a low branch, looking like nature's version of spaghetti with attitude. In another few hours, you'll begin splicing, joining cords together to make longer ones. This takes a whole separate set of knots, with names like tuichi, or, in your case, what was that again? The joins have to be seamless. No bumps, no weak spots. A bad splice can mean a snapped lashing, and that means, well, you in the ocean with the fish and not in a poetic way. One of the most surprisingly complicated cords is used for the mast lashing. It has to be strong enough to hold up under intense wind pressure, but flexible enough to allow for adjustments mid-voyage. It's kind of like a bossy cat, temperamental, but you love it anyway. Some knots require cord with just the right amount of stretch, which means how tight or loose you twist during braiding changes everything. It's equal parts physics, craft, and a little bit of paranoia. And there's that lingering question again, why not just use nails? Or pegs? Or glue? The short answer, they didn't need to. These fiber cords, properly made and properly tied, held better than metal. Plus, they allowed the canoe to breathe. You look at the frame again, starting to visualize where each cord will go. The join between the Ayako, crossbeams, and the AMA outrigger float will require dozens of precise lashings. Each one must bear weight, flex under pressure, and survive ocean spray, flying fish collisions, and the occasional paddler with poor balance. There's a sense of ceremony in all this. The cords aren't just tools. They're offerings. Some lashings were done with whispered prayers, others only on certain days. You didn't just bind wood. You aligned the ocean's rhythm, asking it gently not to kill you. It's a quiet form of humility. The ocean is big. Your canoe is not. The thing standing between you and a watery grave is a bunch of old coconut hair that you made with your hands. But somehow, that makes it feel stronger. You finish another coil and set it aside. Your fingers ache. Your back complains, but your heart is a little lighter. Each cord is a promise. Each twist, a memory. And all of them together, they're how you survive. You stretch your legs and squint at the unfinished canoe. The hull, shaped with hand-carved planks and stitched seams, rests silently like a sleeping fish, its curved belly pointing skyward. But what you're really looking at, the part that will decide whether you sail or swim, is the outrigger, or more precisely, the lashings that attach the AMA that's afloat to the Ayako, the horizontal crossbeams, and those in turn to the canoe itself. This isn't a job for beginners or anyone in a hurry. Lash the outrigger wrong, and you'll wobble like a drunk duck every time a wave whispers your name. Lash it well, and your canoe glides with eerie, almost suspicious stability. You shuffle over to the parts. The AMA sits beside you, basically a slim log, carefully carved, sometimes even hollowed out slightly, depending on how buoyant you want to be when the sea gets feisty. It smells of cured wood and patience. The Ayako, the beams, are long, curved arms, shaped like they want to hug the sea, but also survive it. Your hands move to the sunnet. You've made enough of it to wrap the moon, and now it's time to put to work. First, you place the Ayako across the canoe hull. It sits like a bridge, and you start your lashing with a basic figure-8 bind, a motion that loops the cord under the hull's edge, over the beam, then again in a crisscross, until the connection feels like it might outlast you. Historians still argue whether the Ayako was always lashed at the same angle. Some diagrams suggest slight variations for speed versus stability. Others think different islands had unique preferences based on sea conditions, or, more likely, generational stubbornness. The first few lashings are purely structural. Think of them as the quiet introverts of canoe. They hold everything together, without demanding attention. You pull each loop tight, the sennit stretching with a gentle squeak, the friction heating your palms slightly. Every pull tests your patience. Too loose and the beam shifts. Too tight, and you risk splitting the wood. Next comes the AMA. You roll it into place, aligning it with the notched ends of the Ayako. Here, things get more complicated. The lashings must do 3 things. Hold tight under pressure, allow slight flexing during wave impact, and never, ever come undone at the wrong moment. Like when you're 300 miles from the nearest land, and your travel companion is a very judgmental seabird. You start the knot known locally as the Ifeaga, an intricate weave that loops around the Ayako. tucks beneath the AMA, and zigzags in a pattern that would make a spider envious. It looks decorative, but it's pure function. One wrong step, and the knot becomes a useless lump. But get it right, and it tightens as the waves push and pull like a living hinge. As you work, you notice something odd. Each knot begins to look like the last, but somehow each feels different. The way your hands move, the sound of the cord tightening, the exact tension in the air. It's like knotting is a conversation, not a formula. There's a little-known tidbit. Some canoe builders claim they could hear the knot sing when it was perfect, a soft hum made by the vibration of tightened sonnet over wood. Maybe it was just the wind, or maybe that's how generations pass down knowledge without a single diagram. A breeze picks up, lifting the scent of salt and damp rope. Your back aches, your fingers are stained with fiber dust, and yet tying each knot feels strangely satisfying. You are, for the moment, the continuation of someone else's hands. Not a sailor yet, but almost. Let's not forget, this outrigger setup isn't just for balance. It's genius engineering. The asymmetrical float keeps the canoe stable in crosswinds, helps maneuver sharp turns, and lets a single paddler, or two at most, harness the Pacific without flipping over every time a wave sneezes. It's also flexible. That's the point. Unlike rigid European boats built to be immovable fortresses, Polynesian canoes are designed to move with the sea. The lashings allow the Ayako to shift just a little under pressure, absorbing the ocean's punches like a bamboo boxer. Historians love this bit, because while the Western world was still arguing over whether the Earth floated on cosmic turtles, Polynesians were mastering wave-compensating flex joints using nothing but coconut string and engineering intuition. You pause, run your fingers along completed lashing, and smile. It's ugly, uneven, slightly off-center. Perfect. Not all lashings are the same, of course. Some are temporary, made for small fishing trips. Others are ceremonial. Thicker cords, more elaborate knots, even dyed sonnet for big voyages or sacred rituals. And then there's invisible lashings, ones tucked beneath decorative coverings, hidden from view, but carrying a whole structure like the shy kid who actually organized a group project. A quirky aside, in some places, kids were taught to practice on toy canoes, using chicken bones as Ayako and banana peels for AMA, which sounds adorable until you remember the stakes. One day, they'd be expected to lash a real canoe that would carry actual people across thousands of miles of hostile water. And maybe, if they were lucky, their knots wouldn't come undone just as they spotted land. You stand back and stretch again. The AMA now rests beside the canoe, lightly flexing as you push on it. The lashings creak a little, but they hold. They always hold. You hope. There's one more knot to tie before you rest. The T-Yuffie, or final bind, is a small looped hitch that secures the free ends of the sonnet into the main wrap. It's less about function and more about intention, a symbolic closure that tells the knot in the canoe, we're done for now. You tie it slowly, with respect, and for a brief moment, the canoe breathes beneath your hands. Your hands hover over the canoe, now laced together like a puzzle only you know the solution to. And while the lashings have held beautifully, tight, rhythmic, maybe even elegant in a rustic way, you know full well that the sea doesn't just test your knots, it tests your steering, which is why today's headache is the steering paddle. You are the massive plank of wood that will become your rudder. If you don't lose a toe carving it, it's long, curved slightly, with one end tapering down like a fishtail that never learned to swim. Steering paddles in the Polynesian tradition aren't just functional, they're sacred. Some were carved with symbols of protection, others left deliberately plain, perhaps so as not to tempt the ocean into noticing you too much. You pick up a stone adze and start shaping the edges. Flakes would peeling away with each hit. It's not about speed, it's about weight. Too light, and you'll fight to control the canoe. Too heavy, and your arms will hate you 3 hours into a crosswind sprint. Historians still argue whether the steering paddle doubled as a weapon. Some oral traditions say yes. It was a captain's last offense against pirates, sharks, or unruly crew. Others say the paddle was too important to risk damaging, that it held too much spiritual weight to become a glorified whacking stick. As usual, probably both are true. depending on whether the person holding it was having a good day. Once you've shaped the blade, you move to the handle, smoothing it down with a piece of coral. The grain of the wood warms under your hands. This paddle won't be permanently attached to the canoe. It's held by you, by strength and sweat and sheer commitment to not drifting into eternity. But before it earns its place beside you, there's another set of knots to master, the lashing of spare paddles. Because, of course, you bring backups. Steering paddles snap more often than you like to admit, usually at the worst moment, and unlike modern gear, there's no convenient online return policy. So you tie the kakana, a double loop knot that binds your backup paddles to the crossbeams without interfering with movement. The knot needs to be snug, but also fast to release, because when a paddle breaks mid-journey, you don't want to be fumbling around like a sleep-deprived crab. There's a rhythm to this kind of knotting. Wrap, pull, twist, tuck. It's different from the structural lashings. This one's about readiness. You're not building the canoe now. You're building your escape plan. And you can't help but notice the symbolism. So much of the Polynesian Canoe is about flexibility, about options. It's not armored like a galleon or rigid like a Viking ship. It bends, it moves, it thinks ahead. A canoe, like its navigator, must always have a backup plan. A quirky detail you remember from your elders. In some communities, spare paddles were carved with jokes or riddles etched into the handles, little morale boosters for when the ocean got personal. You run your thumb over the handle of yours and consider carving. If lost, please return to dry land. With the paddle secured, your thoughts turn to the steering technique itself. It's less about brute force, more about finesse. You lean the blade into the current, feather it through the water, and feel how the canoe responds. Slow, like a whale deciding whether to acknowledge your presence. Modern sailors rely on rudders and gears. You have wood, water, and your body's memory of previous mistakes. You try out the motions now, twisting the paddle gently, imagining a gust of wind, catching the sail, counterbalancing it with a push. The steering paddle is more than a tool. It's an extension of your intention. And like all good intentions, it's only as reliable as the strength behind it. One little known fact. Some expert navigators use their feet to help steer, wedging the paddle while adjusting the sail with their hands. Try that in rough waters, and you better have the balance of a flamingo with a master's degree in physics. And there's another layer here. Steering wasn't always a solo job. On long voyages, 2 or even 3 crew members would rotate the role, each with their own subtle style. Some were aggressive, favoring sharp cuts through waves. Others took the soft path, coasting along currents with barely a whisper. Your arms ache just thinking about it. But also, weirdly, you can't wait. You untie and retie the paddle once more, this time using a slightly different lashing. Taudao Yu, a looped hitch meant to prevent vibrations. Some knots are about silence. When the ocean is still and your canoe hums with tension, even the smallest tremor through your steering arm can tell you stories. A change in current, a nearby shoal, something not quite visible on the horizon. And then there's a taudao, the checking loop, used to secure the paddle when not in use, but quick to release if needed. It's tied with sort of silent respect, a reminder that the paddle, like the sea, is not to be taken lightly. You sit back now, paddle in hand, canoe before you, and realize you've tied over a dozen knots today, all variations on the same theme. Control. Not dominance. Not mastery. Just enough influence to stay afloat, to stay the course, and to maybe, just maybe, come home. Because in the end, you're not trying to conquer the ocean. You're just trying to dance with it. You wait before the birds, mostly because one landed on your face in the dark and stare at you like you owed it rent. But you forgive it. Today's task is critical. It's time to tackle the sail rigging, arguably the most dramatic part of a Polynesian canoe, and definitely the most likely to throw you into a rage spiral of knots and wind-based despair. You stretch and approach the mast. Unlike European ships with fixed vertical masts drilled and bolted into submission, Polynesian canoes use removable masts, ingeniously socketed into the crossbeams where, you guessed it, more lashings. The idea? If the wind gets hostile or if the canoe capsizes, you can take it down and reset. Flexibility again. Everything here is temporary and perfect. You set the mast into its notch, A carved hole reinforced with bone and additional rope lashings. You start your work with the kiha lashing, a firm figure-8 pattern that pulls the mast snug into the ayako. Pull loop tighten, the sennit creaks like it's clearing its throat. You give it one more tug, and the mast gives a slight approving shudder. Historians still argue whether masts were always central or slightly forward for balance. Some depictions show the mast dead center. Others, slightly off to let the sail curve better with prevailing trade winds. One thing's for sure, these folks knew wind better than most people know their own siblings. Now the sail. Ah, yes, the soul of your canoe. This isn't a triangle of polyester with a brand logo. This is a crab claw sail, shaped like two wings of a manta ray in mid-flight. It curves upward, sweeping back, held aloft on two booms, and it looks like it wants to take off without you. You lay it out carefully on the sand. It's made from strips of pandanus leaves, dried and stitched with coconut fiber into long panels. Then those panels are sewn into a kind of patchwork, part kite maker, part sail designer, part why are my fingers bleeding? You begin attaching the booms, the two angle poles that stretch the sail into its iconic claw shape. These are the arms that give the sail its unique geometry and its surprising aerodynamic lift. You use the matau knot for this, a knot that must flex under pressure but never slip. It's the Goldilocks of knots. Tight but not choking, firm but not rigid. You pull the sennit through, wrapping it 3 times, then tucking it beneath the boom and looping it again. The knot hums with tension as you finish it, and you step back to admire the structure. It's like holding a folded bird in your arms, waiting for it to stretch its wings. A fun little tidbit. Some Polynesian sailmakers use human hair woven into the lashings for added strength and symbolic protection. Creepy? Maybe. Practical? Definitely. Hair has incredible tensile strength and also, according to some beliefs, confuses malevolent spirits. Can't argue with that combo. You stand and begin hoisting the sail. This is done with another knot, 2-eye lashing, which pulls the upper boom to the top of the mast. You haul slowly, the rope scraping against the mast in a whispering rhythm, and the sail unfurls like a sleepy bat stretching in the morning sun. Once it's fully raised, you begin tying down the shrouds, ropes that stretch diagonally from the mast of the ayako on both sides. These stabilize the whole setup and prevent the mast from flopping around like a drunken palm tree. You tie them using efealua, a doubled reef knot with extra turns, stability and redundancy in one tidy package. The canoe shifts gently in the morning breeze, and you can already feel how the sail wants to move. Unlike square sails that just catch wind, the crab claw shapes the air around it. It uses both lift and drag. It can sail into the wind, tacking at surprisingly tight angles. And most beautifully, you can adjust the boom angle mid-journey, tightening or relaxing the sail's curve depending on the wind's attitude. And boy, the wind has attitude. You tie down the sheet line, the rope that controls the boom's angle during sailing. It runs from the lower boom to your hand or a cleat on the canoe's frame, depending on how fancy you're feeling. The knot here? The tatasi, a single line hitch that lets you adjust on the fly without needing a second hand. It's the knot equivalent of a sarcastic eyebrow. Low effort, high control. You test the tension. Everything holds. The sail leans forward with purpose. It's ready. You sit and admire the craftsmanship, and then your thoughts drift, as they tend to do on little sleep and too much coconut water, to the metaphor of it all. The sail is not rigid. It doesn't fight the wind. It uses it, bends to it, rides it like a whispering ally. And your knots? They're not anchors. They're invitations. Each lashing gives the sail a framework within which to dance. You remember another fun fact. The term for sail in many Polynesian languages is closely related to the word for spirit or breath. To raise a sail is, in some traditions, to breathe life into the canoe. So when you tied the last line, maybe you didn't just build a boat. Maybe you made a body exhale. There's still one final knot to check before you let the breeze have its say. The TI knot, used to furl the sail when you're not moving. It folds the wings gently back into a resting position, tied with loops that pull free instantly with a single tug. You undo it now, letting the sail flap open for a moment, just to feel the tension pull on the mast, the lines, and the beams. Everything creaks like an old friend stretching after a nap. And you grin, because suddenly, it's not just a pile of sticks and strings anymore. It's a living thing. You lean into the canoe, arms resting across the crossbeam, and exhale like a person who's finally caught up with the to-do list that started several centuries ago. The sail is rigged, the paddles stowed, the knots. Oh, the knots. But just when you think you've outwitted rope for good, it's time for the piece de resistance, the outrigger. This dear insomniac voyager is where the canoe earns its balance, and where the knots get delightfully weird. Polynesian canoes are typically double-hulled, waka-hurua, if you're an Aotearoa, or single-hulled with a stabilizing float on one side, what most people recognize as an outrigger. It's a smaller hull or float, lashed the main canoe by two or more long, curved beams called ayako. Think of it as your canoe's best friend. Always there, slightly awkward, saving you from tipping face first into the ocean every time the wind gets sassy. Today's task is lashing the AMA, the outrigger float, securely to those ayako beams. It may sound simple. It's not. These lashings bear some of the most dynamic stress in the entire canoe structure. They have to flex when waves slap sideways, but they also need to hold when your cousin decides to stand on the AMA to wave dramatically at dolphins. You begin with the forward ayako, pressing it into its carved notch on AMA. The lashing used here is called the wakamau, a methodical series of cross-lashings that resemble a stretched-out DNA helix. The motion is repetitive. Under, over, twist, cinch. It feels like sewing two bones together with tension and trust. Historians still argue whether these lashings were intended to be permanent or semi-flexible. Some designs allowed the AMA to pivot up or down in the water. Others locked it flat for open sea travel. It probably depended on the intended voyage, coastal meandering or full-on. Let's vanish into the Pacific and see what happens. You tighten the wakamau, then reinforce it with F-adamillo, a perimeter knot that binds the edge loops like a belt. There's a strange joy in seeing the two separate pieces become one. The float no longer rolls on its own. It becomes part of the rhythm. You move to the rear ayako, repeating the lashing, but this one includes a pole lashing, an extra loop that adds vertical tension. When you stand back, the beams form a cradle around the canoe, and the outrigger sits just off the water, like it's waiting to be needed but not intruding. A quirky piece of trivia bubbles up. Some outrigger lashings were done with mangrove bark rope, which not only flexed like a yoga instructor, but also had natural salt resistance. Island engineers, 1, weather, 0. Now, don't forget the secondary lashings, those dainty little ropes that tie the ayako into the mei using the kind of knot, which translates loosely as the knot that refuses to be surprised. It doesn't budge, doesn't complain, just sits quietly doing its job through storms and sibling arguments. As you crouch and tighten these last bindings, your eyes catch the delicate shimmer of tension all across the canoe. Every rope is humming. Every knot is a frozen moment of decision. And then comes the stability test. You stand in the main hull, lean slightly to port, and watch as the AMA dips gently into the water, then levels. You shift back. It rises again. It's not stiff like a catamaran. It's more like a yoga ball with excellent posture. That's the brilliance of Polynesian design. The outrigger doesn't fight the waves. It flirts with them. It absorbs the energy, diffuses it, and lets you stay upright without forcing nature to obey. Of course, all this presumes you actually tied the knots correctly. A famous story tells of a canoe crew that forgot to double-check their kind of lashings before a voyage, only to watch their AMA float off into the distance while they bob helplessly like confused coconuts. Lesson learned. Check your knots. Twice. You take one last pass, fingers tugging each line. Satisfied, you sit on the ayako and let your feet dangle. The outrigger rests beside you like a loyal dog, ready to help keep you alive if things get dramatic. And they will. One last note. In some islands, the lashings on the AMA were covered with plant resin or sharkskin strips to reduce water drag and preserve the sediment from rot. You rub your palm along the beam and consider adding a little sharkskin flair of your own, if only to feel cooler while you eat dried fish in the rain. You laugh a little. Not because anything's particularly funny, but because you realize how absurdly detailed this all is. You've tied over a dozen unique knots for a single structural component, and the day's barely half over. But that's the way it goes in the Pacific. Out here, the difference between I guess it floats and crossing 2,000 miles of open ocean is measured in rope tension, hull flex, and whether your outrigger is still attached after the first wave. You stretch your arms. The canoe feels the wake now, like it understands you. Not that it could talk. Though if it did, it would probably say, "Let's not forget the bailer next time, genius." But you're ready. Everything's lashed. Everything's singing in its fibers. And as you walk away for lunch, you throw one last glance over your shoulder. The canoe rocks gently, sail furled, outrigger proud, waiting not just for wind or tide, but for you to decide when to go. You're lying flat on your back now, staring at the sky, which is doing its best impression of a damp bowl of porridge. The clouds are thick, heavy, and unbothered by your need for dramatic sunlight. Still, there's a moment of calm, just you, the canoe, and an endless catalog of knots unspooling your brain, like a bad dream you're kind of proud of. But no time to nap. You've got one last major category of knots to tackle before the sea beast is officially seaworthy. Steering systems. That's right, rudders, steering oars, and the jarringly complicated lashings that keep them from flying off during a sudden gust. Polynesian canoes didn't always have fixed rudders like Western ships. In fact, most relied on steering paddles, massive ornate wooden blades mounted on the stern or operated manually by one or two seasoned crew members who had biceps like carved obsidian. These paddles didn't just help with direction. They acted as stabilizers, counterweights, and at times, informal emergency brakes. You walk around the back of your canoe with the mounting arms, Kili Kapiko, wait to receive the steering paddle. These arms are little wooden pegs, or extended beams, lashed not nailed, like everything else. First knot of the day, the Efalua Tiki, a doubled hitch that creates a tension frame, without squeezing the wood like an anxious handshake. You loop the rope slowly, wrapping it in a loose square pattern, then crisscrossing the joints like you're dressing a chicken in rope corsetry. Pull, cinch, breathe, repeat. By the end, the paddle rests snugly between the supports, able to pivot, yet stable enough to take a sudden directional shove. Historians still argue whether these steering paddles were designed to act as true rudders or just oversized oars. Some believe early Polynesians may have pioneered flexible rudder control before Europeans ever thought to question their own tillers. Others argue the paddles were too blunt for precision turns. Either way, nobody's denying the results. For 1,000 miles of open sea crossed with nothing but hand-carved wood and muscle memory. You finish the main lashings, then add a safety loop, the Wapo knot, a backup line connecting the paddle to the rear beam. It's a subtle, understated little loop. But if the main bindings break mid-storm, it might be the only thing keeping your paddle from joining a school of confused tuna. A bit of trivia you're unlikely to forget now. In some islands, especially Tonga and Samoa, steering paddles were seen as sacred, not just tools, but spiritual anchors. The more elaborately carved the handle, the more status it carried. Some had family crests. Others had what looked suspiciously like angry chicken faces. That's probably symbolic of something. Now, if you're sailing a double-hull canoe, you might also install a central tiller beam between the sterns, a kind of bridge that holds the steering or in the middle. These beams use a no-ho knot, a heavy, triple-wrapped lashing that could absorb vibration without snapping under pressure. You loop it now, sweat collecting under your eyes as a thick fiber fights you like an overconfident shoelace. By the time you're done, the whole stern looks like a woven sculpture, half art, half physics exam. You sit back, rubbing your palms against your pants, leaving behind smears of salt, fiber dust, and pride. Now for the hand ropes. Small lines used by the person steering to adjust pressure on the paddle blade. These get the Tamilo lashing, a circular hitch that allows for quick tugs and slow releases. With just a flick of your wrist, you can angle the blade in or out of the water. It's like reins on a horse. If the horse were made of wind and indifference, you tie the first one, tug gently, and the paddle shifts. You tie the second. It glides back. Satisfied, you whisper something admiring under your breath. possibly romantic, probably nonsense. Because honestly, you're starting to love this canoe, not in a write poems to it way, but in a deep, respectful, please don't kill me at sea kind of way. One last thing to check before calling it a day: the secondary steering lines. These run from the paddle mount to the side IACO, giving you fine-tuned control. Like tension wires on a bridge, they stabilize under load and let you lean into sharp turns without losing your grip. You tie them with Mia Tauchua knots, service loops, named because they serve the main steering lines in times of stress. Cute, right? You yank each one, feeling the flex give just enough. The whole assembly sighs in satisfaction. Or maybe that's you. There's a sudden gust of wind now, and you instinctively grab one of the steering lines. The paddle tugs slightly, adjusts, and the canoe shifts its attitude like a dancer finding better footing. And just like that, it clicks. This entire process, the days of lashings, the endless knots, the slow shaping of it into logic, it's all about communication. Between you and the boat, between the boat and the sea, between the sea and whatever part you still believes it's worth crossing. The steering paddle rests in its cradle now. The wind moves past. The ropes hold. Everything is listening. You wake up the next morning with rope burns in places you didn't know had skin. Your fingers ache. Your shoulders creak. And your dreams were a swirling tangle of knots, sea spray, and that one lashing that just wouldn't sit straight no matter how many times you retied it. But as a new day in your canoe, the increasingly overbuilt masterpiece it is, still needs one final layer of over-engineering before it's ready to touch the ocean. Today, we enter the world of securing cargo and crew, which, let's face it, is code for how to keep everything from yeeting itself overboard during a rogue wave. Start with the lashings for supplies. Every canoe, whether voyaging for weeks or just cruising between islands, had to carry an absurd amount of stuff. Coconuts, gourd of water, weapons, pigs and baskets, yes, really, and occasionally an elder relative who insisted on giving advice the entire way. All of this had to be tied down in a way that wouldn't crush it, lose it, or somehow set it on fire mid-sail. You begin with the pokai knot, often used to lash baskets and crates. It's a circular tie that tightens from the center and can be quickly released with one tug. Imagine a drawstring hoodie, but if the hoodie were filled with fermented breadfruit and the drawstring had survived a saltwater monsoon, loop the rope around your basket of pretend provisions. Pull, cinch, tie. The cargo shifts slightly, then stops. You get a hard nudge with your foot. It holds. Good knot. Good imaginary pig. Now for deck netting. Not every canoe had this, but some long haulers stretched coconut fiber netting between the IACO beams to form a flexible platform. These nets were tied using the kakua knot, a grid-style weave that allows for balance and breathability. You bend low, fingers looping and knotting the latticework in long, sleepy lines. Over, under, over. It's like playing tic-tac-toe with Poseidon. Historians still debate whether these nets were primarily for sleeping, for food prep, or just for lounging dramatically like some kind of salt-soaked lounge lizard. Probably all three, especially if you were important enough to avoid paddle duty. Once you're finished, the net sways gently under your hand. It's the ocean equivalent of a hammock. If your hammock were lashed to a floating torpedo of ambition and hope. Next, you move on to passenger lashings, not for people, unless they're especially rowdy, but for their gear. Spear racks get a special bracket lashed using a mao knot, shaped like a looping figure eight that keeps sharp ends from wobbling loose. Ceremonial drums and religious artifacts, yes, those came too, were tied using intricate lokahi lashings, which symbolize unity. You squint while recreating one now, the symmetry oddly satisfying, like tying a blessing into the boat itself. At this point, you're probably wondering, what about when something does go overboard? Excellent question. Polynesian voyagers had quick-release systems built into many lashings, particularly for cargo that had to be jettisoned fast, say, to lighten the load during storms. The Noah loop was one such clever trick, tied like a standard overhand knot, but with a hidden release thread. You pull the cord, and the whole thing falls away like a magician's tablecloth trick. You try it now. Tie the loop, hide the thread, yank, and the basket rolls off the deck. Success. unless it was your lunch. Then regrets. Here's a fun fact. In some island groups, sailors would carry sacred knots, small bundles of complex lashings believed to offer protection, tucked into hull or worn around the neck. These were like lucky charms for the superstitious voyager. One particularly elaborate design, the Tata Ori Moana, featured 7 interwoven loops representing stars, ancestors, and fish gods, because of course the fish gods need knots too. You tie one now. It takes 15 minutes, looks like a mistake made by a pretzel, and still somehow feels powerful. You tuck it into a carved nook on the hull. The boat seems to shiver, either with appreciation or amusement. Hard to say. Now you walk the length of the canoe, tightening everything. Food bundles, secure. Water gourds, double knotted. Fishing gear, tied with a madhouse slip knot, quick to deploy when the crew spots tuna or, occasionally, a very lost octopus. You glance at the little ridges where each knot presses into the canoe's beams. They look like tattoos, scar lines in rope. Each one tells a story. Some practical, some sacred, some just evidence of your stubborn refusal to leave things loose. There's a knot your uncle used to swear by, the Kapanga spiral, which was supposed to absorb bad luck like a sponge. You don't quite believe him, but you tie one anyway, just in case. Finally, you lash your own bag. If this were a real voyage, you have to. It gets a no-hoe anchor lashing, tied to the middle beam so it won't roll around and brain you mid-squall. You cinch it tight, then sit back with a sigh that says, "Yes, I have now tied approximately 14,000 knots, and no, I will never be the same." The canoe is ready. Every cargo bundle is still. Every net stretched just right. Every loose object accounted for. The boat hums in the sunlight, or maybe in your mind, with a quiet confidence of something built to endure. It's a little ridiculous, isn't it? How something so ancient can feel so complete. No nails, no screws, no synthetic adhesives. Just rope, rhythm, repetition, and the stubborn artistry of people who didn't believe in shortcuts. You stretch your sore arms and look at your work. Nothing moves. And for the first time since this whole canoe thing began, neither do you. You don't start the day with tying. You start with staring. Because now that your canoe is finally lashed, netted, paddled, propped, rigged, and paddled like a basket of sacred coconuts, you find yourself simply standing there, a little speechless. It's not just a boat anymore. It's a full-blown, floating thesis and rope-based overcommitment. But there's still one piece left to prepare before you can even dream of launching, the sailing rig. Oh yes, today you're building the mast and sail, which naturally means tying even more knots. A whole new ecosystem of lashings, hitches, and please don't collapse on me connections that will carry your boat across thousands of miles of ocean. No pressure. You hoist the mast, usually made from how or breadfruit wood, into place. It's long, thick, and slightly curved, like a retired javelin with unresolved emotional baggage. The mast slots into a notch mid-deck, between the hull beams, but it doesn't stand on its own, not even close. This is where the mast-based lashing comes in, the umi knot. It wraps around the mast foot and the deck support, forming a kind of tension cradle that allows for flexing, while keeping the mast from tipping like a sleepy giraffe. You crouch, thread the core around the post, under the beam, loop through twice, and then finish with a figure-8 tuck. It's intricate, stubborn, and completely unforgiving if rushed. Historians still argue whether Polynesian sailors pre-stressed these lashings before departure or adjusted them mid-voyage. Some believe they had a system of daily tightening rituals. Others think they simply tied it once and let fate do the rest. As for you, you tug that last loop like your dignity depends on it, because it probably does. With the mast stabilized, you now turn to the outriggers and shrouds, the support lines that hold the mast upright, especially when the sail starts pulling sideways with all the force of a giant wind-powered toddler. You tie a taut-high shroud knot, which blends tension with flexibility, using 3 anchor points, one each hull side, and one angle back toward the stern. The lines form a triangle, taut as a drum, humming when you pluck them, like a guitar tuned by Poseidon himself. Time to raise the sail. Polynesian sails weren't your typical triangle on a stick setup. No, They were often crab claw sails. Imagine a stretched-out triangle with a long top boom and a shorter bottom spar, looking vaguely like an angry manta ray. These sails were made from finely woven pandanus leaves, sewn into panels with coconut fiber thread. They were light, breathable, and waterproof, which is more than you can say for most of your clothes right now. You stretch the sail fabric out, running your hand along the seams. The leaf fibers are coarse but flexible. Then you attach it to the spars using a pili knot, a flat lashing that distributes pressure evenly. You go every few inches, spacing each tie like stitches on a giant patient who's seen some things. The top boom connects to the mast using a Moana hitch, which allows it to pivot and tilt, adjusting to the wind. You tie it with deliberate slowness, imagining how many times you'll be adjusting this thing mid-squall. Fingers frozen, teeth clenched. So yes, better make it reliable. The bottom spar gets its own lashing to a central swivel beam, usually offset slightly toward the windward side. This one's tied with a hapey knot, a clever loop that allows the entire sail to be reefed or even dropped quickly if things get wild. You test the loop, pull the reef cord, and watch the sail fold inward like an obedient origami bird. A nice touch, considering what the Pacific Ocean likes to do to people who forget it's in charge. There's a weirdly heartwarming moment as you step back and look at the sail now fully attached. It curves slightly in the breeze, catching the light like a dragonfly wing. You squint and realize something that surprises you. It looks fast. Not just this won't sink fast, but this might outrun a storm fast. And considering these canoes once crossed from Tahiti to Hawaii, roughly 2,500 miles of nothing but open sea and existential courage, that speed wasn't just aesthetic, it was survival. Here's something you might not know. Early European sailors couldn't wrap their heads around Polynesian sailing rigs. Many recorded in their journals, somewhat dismissively, that the sails looked backward or seemed impossible to steer. But the Polynesians weren't just steering. They were tacking, reaching, and jibing like masters. Their rigs allowed them to sail into the wind, something square-sailed European ships couldn't even dream of at the time. Of course, historians still debate just how windward-capable these rigs really were. Some believe the design allowed for nearly 70-degree angles against the breeze. Others think that a generous estimate made by romantics who've never tried reefing a crab claw sail in a typhoon. Either way, no one disputes the results. Thousands of years, thousands of miles, zero compasses. You now run the control lines from the bottom spar to the deck cleats. 2 rope handles that let you swing the sail left or right depending on the wind's mood. These get tied with cowhee knots. Control lashings that tighten under load but loosen easily when wet. You pull one, the sail pivots. You pull the other, it swings back. And just like that, you build a wind-powered steering system out of leaves, sticks, and complicated string. You look at your hands. Rope fiber embedded in your fingerprints. A faint bruise on your thumb from yesterday's overconfident reefing attempt. You look at the canoe. It's ready. Actually ready. Every beam secured. Every oar in place. Every lashing tight as island law. You raise your arms. Stretch your back and let the breeze hit your face. Salt, heat, rope oil. It smells like effort. Like time. Like history. The sail flaps slightly, testing itself. The boat shifts in the sand, almost eager, and you whisper just once, "Not yet, soon." Now, after all this tying, lashing, and adjusting, you finally get to that moment you've been dreaming about for weeks, the moment you launch. The canoe is no longer a project. It's a living, breathing vessel that embodies centuries of Polynesian ingenuity and, frankly, stubbornness. You trudge down to the water's edge, the sand cold and grainy between your toes, the waves lazily licking the shore like they're trying to decide if they want to wake up or not. You take a deep breath and place your hands on the hull. The wood is smooth, worn just so by your many hours of labor and a little bit of salt air magic. You push. The canoe grinds softly over the sand, inching closer to the water. Then, with a final heave, the stern slips into the surf. The water envelopes the canoe, cold and welcoming. You feel the first jolt of pride mixed with a healthy dose of terror. Because this isn't just a boat, it's a promise. A promise to the ocean, to your ancestors, and to yourself. Historians still argue whether the Polynesians invented outrigger canoes independently across various islands, or if the technology spread through contact and trade. Some evidence suggests the latter, but no matter the origin story, the design's efficiency is undeniable. You climb aboard, sitting low on the deck. The canoe sways gently, a cradle rocked by the tide. You run your fingers along the lashings, feeling the tension and the life woven into every knot. You reach for the steering paddle, feeling the familiar grip and the reassuring weight. The paddle rests steady in the cradle, ready to respond to your slightest command. It's amazing how something so simple, wood and rope, can give you such a powerful connection to the vast, unpredictable ocean. As you push off from the shore, the sail catches the breeze. The crab claw sail unfurls gracefully, like a great wing catching air. The canoe picks up speed, slicing through the waves with surprising grace and agility. You lean into the motion, the spray kissing your face, the sun warming your back. The world falls away, leaving only you, the boat, and the endless horizon. There's a quirky fact here that often gets overlooked. Some Polynesian sailors believed their canoes had spirits. These spirits could be angered by careless handling of the ropes or disrespectful behavior. Certain knots were tied as offerings or prayers, meant to appease these invisible passengers and ensure safe passage. It might sound like superstition, but in a world where the ocean is both friend and foe, such beliefs made perfect sense. They were reminders to respect the craft, the sea, and the delicate balance between them. As the sun dips lower, casting golden light across the water, you feel a deep sense of connection, not just a canoe or the sea, but to the generations who sailed before you, following stars, reading waves, and trusting in their skills and their knots. The canoe glides onward, a small but mighty testament to human ingenuity and resilience. And you realize all those hours spent tying, reading, and obsessing over lashings weren't just about survival. They were about creating a vessel worthy of the journey, a symbol of hope and a bridge between worlds. You close your eyes, feeling the rhythm of the waves, the whisper of the wind, and the steady pulse of canoe beneath you. Tonight, you sail with the ancestors. You're no longer just paddling, you're navigating by stars. After the adrenaline rush of the launch fades, you settle into the real skill of Polynesian voyaging, wayfinding. It's not just steering a canoe. It's reading the ocean, the sky, the birds, and the subtle shifts in wind and wave. It's a practice so complex that even modern sailors marvel at its precision. Wayfinding uses a mental map etched into memory, combining natural cues that you learn to interpret like a finely tuned instrument. The Polynesians didn't rely on compasses or GPS. Those were centuries away. Instead, they read the stars, the swell patterns, cloud formations, and the behavior of sea life. Tonight, you lie back and look up at the night sky. The Milky Way stretches across the black canvas, a glittering river that's been a navigational guide for millennia. The constellation Tamariri, resembling a canoe, points you toward your destination. You memorize the position of key stars, Polaris, the Southern Cross, and others, to maintain your course. You feel the ocean swell beneath you, rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Unlike the chaotic chop of waves near the shore, the swell is consistent, generated by distant winds and storms far beyond your line of sight. You learn to sense its direction and adjust your heading accordingly. One quirky tidbit: Polynesian navigators could even detect subtle changes in watercolor caused by underwater reefs and islands. They called this phenomenon aula, a clue to landfall that might come hours before you see the island itself. Historians still debate how much of this knowledge was encoded in oral traditions and how much was developed through direct experience. Some believe it was a form of ancient science, passed down through stories, songs, and hands-on teaching. Others argue it was more intuitive, relying heavily on trial and error and deep respect for the ocean. You try a mental exercise taught by old masters, imagining a star compass with 32 points, each corresponding to a different star or constellation used for navigation. You picture the canoes heading relative to these points, checking your position in an endless three-dimensional map of sky and sea. It's exhausting and exhilarating. You glance at the lashings on your canoe, feeling a strange kinship, just as the knots hold the boat together physically. This web of celestial knowledge holds your voyage together spiritually. Then there are the bird signals. Certain birds, like the Manu o Kaka and the Titi, only fly a certain distance from land. Spotting them can mean you're close to an island, even if it's hidden behind a haze or below the horizon. You watch the horizon for these feathered guides, hoping for a sign. It's a delicate balance, trusting the knowledge in your mind, the boat beneath you, and the living world around you. Mistakes can mean drifting endlessly or worse. But the tradition is so deeply ingrained that Polynesian sailors cross thousands of miles with astonishing accuracy. You sip from your water gourd, the cool liquid grounding you. There's a calmness here, a quiet meditation on survival, skill, and the interconnectedness of nature. The stars twinkle above, and you realize that you're part of an unbroken chain of voyagers, each knot tied, each wave read, each star memorized, a testament to the enduring power of human curiosity and courage. You smile, feeling the night wrap around you like a soft blanket, and you drift off, dreaming of distant islands and the next great journey.